He always arrived on time, opened Keanu Reeves's door with a smile, and then disappeared into the night. But one rainy evening, Keanu followed his driver. And what he discovered in the shadows shattered his heart. Why was a man this loyal hiding the truth? And what would Keanu do when he uncovered it? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The studio lights dimmed behind him as Keanu Reeves stepped out onto the pavement, the streets of downtown Los Angeles quiet under the weight of midnight. The crew had wrapped late, and the exhaustion clung to him like the heavy fog that had rolled in off the Pacific. He pulled his coat tighter and glanced toward the curb where a familiar black sedan waited with its hazard lights blinking. The car door opened smoothly, and there stood Malcolm Torres, his regular driver, holding the door with his usual calm precision. "Evening, sir," Malcolm said, offering a nod and the faintest trace of a smile. Keanu gave a small nod in return, stepping into the back seat. But before Malcolm closed the door, Keanu paused, his hand resting on the edge of the frame. The same jacket. He'd seen it 2 nights ago and again yesterday. A dark gray windbreaker, clean but worn, with a threadbare collar and one sleeve fraying near the wrist. Keanu didn't say anything. Not yet. "Studio lot," he said quietly, and Malcolm nodded again, closing the door gently before circling to the driver's side and sliding in behind the wheel. The engine purred to life, and they pulled away from the curb, headlights slicing through the fog like fingers through mist. Inside the car, the silence was companionable at first. Malcolm's driving was smooth, deliberate. No sudden stops, no jerky turns. He knew the best routes, the shortcuts through LA's labyrinthine side streets. That's why Keanu had requested him months ago. Discreet, reliable, always professional. But tonight, there was something else. A tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Long day?" Malcolm glanced up into the rearview mirror, eyes meeting Keanu's briefly before returning to the road. "Yes, sir. Just a lot of traffic earlier. Took longer than expected to get here." His voice was even, polite, but there was a weight behind it, something Keanu couldn't place. "You've been driving all day?" "Started around 6 this morning," Malcolm said. "Had a few back-to-back clients before this." Keanu nodded slowly, processing. The man looked tired. Not just tired from a long shift, but deeper than that. There were shadows under his eyes, his posture more slouched than usual, as if gravity was winning a quiet battle he refused to acknowledge. "You want coffee?" Keanu asked suddenly. Malcolm blinked. "I'm okay, sir." "You sure? There's a spot up on Wilshire that's open late." "I appreciate it. Maybe another night." Keanu sat back, eyes still fixed on the rearview mirror. The traffic lights reflected off the windshield in rhythmic pulses. He watched the man's hands on the wheel. Steady, focused. But the silence between them wasn't quite the same anymore. Something about Malcolm was changing. Or maybe it had been there all along, and Keanu was only now starting to notice. He didn't press, not tonight. But as they turned onto the nearly empty boulevard, Keanu's eyes lingered on the mirror just a second longer. And for the first time in months, he found himself wondering, who really was the man behind the wheel? The car moved through the quiet city, its tires humming softly against the pavement. Billboards passed in blurred flashes of light, but Keanu's thoughts weren't on the city tonight. They were behind the wheel. Malcolm didn't speak unless spoken to. That had always been part of his professionalism. But lately his silences felt heavier, more personal. The kind of silence that came from someone carrying something too large to set down. Keanu glanced again at the jacket. Not dirty, not tattered, just tired. Like its owner. "You always this quiet?" Keanu asked, his voice low, more curious than confrontational. Malcolm smiled faintly. I figure people like their peace after a long day. They don't mind a little conversation. I'll keep that in mind, sir. The sir was always there, no matter how many times Keanu asked to be called by his first name. Malcolm stuck with it. Polite, precise, almost like a uniform in itself. They passed an underpass where a few tents were pitched along the sidewalk. Keanu noticed Malcolm's eyes flick toward them, then quickly back to the road. There was no expression, just that flicker. A recognition, maybe, or something more. Keanu leaned forward again. "Where's home for you, Malcolm?" There was a pause. "Mid-City," Malcolm replied. "Near Pico and La Brea." It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the truth either. Keanu could hear it in the way the words landed. Too practiced. Too immediate. "Nice area?" "Right enough. Rent's not bad if you know where to look." Another lie, tucked neatly behind a line that sounded rehearsed. Keanu didn't challenge him. He just nodded and sat back, filing the answer away. Something was off. He'd been around too many people wearing masks to not recognize when someone was hiding behind one, but Malcolm wasn't a man fishing for pity. If anything, he was trying very hard not to be noticed at all. They stopped at a red light. A couple crossed the street in front of them, arms around each other, laughing quietly under a shared umbrella. The sight should have been comforting. Instead, Keanu felt the ache of contrast. The quiet loneliness of the man driving him, invisible to the world around him. "You always this tired?" Keanu asked gently. Malcolm gave a soft chuckle, but there was no humor in it. "Just part of the job." Keanu let the silence sit between them for a while after that. The rest of the ride passed quietly, the city sprawling out in shadows and headlights. By the time they reached Keanu's residence, it was nearly 1 a.m. Malcolm got out, opened the door without a word, and stood waiting. Keanu stepped out, hesitated. "Same time tomorrow?" "Yes, sir. I'll be here." Keanu nodded, but he didn't move immediately. He looked at Malcolm, really looked this time. Then he turned and walked inside, the door closing gently behind him. But the questions stayed. Malcolm waited until the front door closed before he returned to the driver's seat. He adjusted his mirrors, checked the empty street, and slowly pulled away from the curb. His hands gripped the wheel tightly for a moment, then loosened as he let out a deep breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Keanu's questions had been unexpected. Not intrusive, but unusually personal. For months, they had ridden in near silence, two men from different worlds sharing quiet miles between destinations. But tonight, Keanu had noticed more than he was supposed to. Malcolm swallowed hard and glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was past 1 a.m., and he still had one last food delivery scheduled before he could rest. He tapped the app open on his phone, accepted the order, and merged into the near-empty traffic with practiced ease. Meanwhile, behind the closed doors of his home, Keanu stood at his kitchen counter, pouring himself a glass of water. He hadn't kicked his shoes off yet. His mind was still in the car, still watching Malcolm's reflection in the rearview mirror. There had been something in the way Malcolm smiled, a kind of restraint. A person trained to stay out of focus, to blend in without leaving a trace. But Keanu had seen past it. At least, he thought he had. He set the glass down and leaned against the counter, arms folded. In his career, he had met all kinds of people, some desperate to be seen, others afraid to be noticed. Malcolm seemed like the second kind. And Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that, underneath all that quiet professionalism, was a man holding something together by sheer will. The next morning, Keanu arrived on set early. The makeup team greeted him, and the director gave notes for the day. But part of him stayed behind in the car. He thought about the jacket, the careful way Malcolm always avoided talking about himself, the laugh that sounded more like a deflection than a joke. He didn't want to overstep. He wasn't looking to pry. But something in him whispered that Malcolm's story wasn't just one of tired nights and long hours. There was a history there. A wound, maybe. or a series of sacrifices no one had ever thanked him for. And somehow, without realizing it, Keanu felt responsible for noticing. Back in the car that night, when Malcolm pulled up again with his quiet smile and familiar nod, Keanu greeted him with the same warmth as always. But this time, as he stepped into the back seat, he looked at Malcolm just a little longer. Not because he suspected something, because he cared enough to see it. The rain came down steady that night, the kind of soft, unrelenting drizzle that soaked the streets in silence. The city's usual buzz had quieted into a rhythmic hush, and puddles shimmered under the neon glow of downtown signs. It was nearly 1 a.m. when Keanu finally stepped outside the back entrance of the studio. The shoot had run long, and most of the crew had already left. Only a few tired security guards remained near the lot, pulling their jackets tighter against the cold. Waiting at the curb, just like always, was Malcolm Torres. The sedan's headlights cut gently through the rain, wipers sweeping steadily. Keanu opened the door without a word and settled into the back seat. He gave a nod toward Malcolm, who responded with his usual soft-spoken greeting. "Evening, sir. I hope the shoot went well." "It was a long one," Keanu said, brushing a bit of water from his coat sleeve. "Appreciate you coming out this late." "No trouble at all." As they pulled away from the curb, Keanu glanced at Malcolm's hands on the wheel. They were steady, but not quite as steady as usual. Every few moments his fingers would twitch. Not enough to swerve, not enough to seem reckless. Just small tremors, the kind that come from exhaustion or cold, or both. "Is your heater working?" Keanu asked quietly. "Yes, sir. Just a little chilly tonight, that's all." Keanu didn't press, but the answer didn't sit right. His eyes moved to the side of Malcolm's jacket. Same one from before. Damp now, the cuffs darkened from rain. Still no umbrella, still no gloves. For a man who drove all night, Malcolm never seemed to come prepared for weather. They drove in silence for a few blocks before Keanu leaned forward slightly. "You mind making a stop?" "Of course not. Where to?" "There's a diner on West Oak. 24-hour place. You hungry?" Malcolm hesitated. "I'm all right, sir. I'm starving," Keanu said with a small smile. "Be easier to get something now than cook later. Come in with me?" "That's not necessary. I'd like the company." There was a pause as Malcolm glanced at him through the rearview mirror, then a quiet nod. "Yes, sir." 10 minutes later, they were seated in a corner booth at the nearly empty diner. A tired waitress brought them menus, scribbled their drink orders, and shuffled back toward the kitchen. Rain streaked the windows behind them. The booth's fluorescent light buzzed softly overhead. Keanu ordered a sandwich and black coffee. Malcolm studied the menu for a moment, then closed it. "Just coffee from me." "You sure?" Keanu asked. "Get whatever you like. My treat." "I appreciate that," Malcolm said, "but I'm not very hungry." Keanu didn't argue. A moment later, Malcolm added, almost reluctantly, "Maybe just toast." Keanu nodded. "Good call." And just like that, they waited in silence, the hum of the diner filling the space between them. When the food arrived, the waitress placed the sandwich in front of Keanu and the small plate of plain toast before Malcolm. No butter, no jam, just 2 slices of dry toast. Malcolm gave a polite "thank you," picked up 1 slice, and took a small bite. He chewed slowly, his eyes fixed on a spot just past Keanu's shoulder, as if keeping his thoughts at bay. Keanu watched him for a moment, then turned his attention to his sandwich. He didn't want to make Malcolm uncomfortable. Still, the man looked like he hadn't had a full meal in days. His posture remained straight, but there was a tension in his shoulders that didn't relax, even in the warmth of the diner. The rain had soaked into the ends of his pants, leaving faint wet marks above his shoes. As they ate, Keanu made light conversation, just enough to keep things from falling into silence. He talked about the film shoot, the weather, an old diner like this one he used to visit after midnight rehearsals. Malcolm responded when appropriate, but didn't elaborate. His words were clipped, courteous, and always came with a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. Keanu glanced down and saw something that made him pause. Malcolm was wrapping half of the toast in a paper napkin. He moved carefully, trying not to make a sound. Folded the slice, tucked it into the napkin, then into the inside pocket of his jacket with practiced ease. Keanu looked away, pretending not to notice, but his chest tightened. They finished the meal quietly. Malcolm drank his coffee down to the last drop as if rationing the warmth. When the check arrived, Keanu grabbed it without a second thought. He left a generous tip and stood. "Headed home?" he asked as they exited into the rain. "I'll get you there first, sir," Malcolm said, opening the car door for him. Keanu stepped inside, sat back, and didn't speak for most of the ride. His eyes watched the droplets race across the window, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. The wrapped toast, the shiver in Malcolm's hands, the too clean, too quiet answers. When they arrived outside Keanu's building, Malcolm stepped out and opened the door once more. Keanu paused, halfway out. "Why don't you take the rest of the night off?" he said. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Yeah. You've done more than enough today." "All right. Thank you, sir." Keanu nodded once and stepped out into the rain. As Malcolm returned to the driver's seat, Keanu turned and began walking slowly down the sidewalk. But instead of heading toward his front door, he pulled up his hood, glanced behind him once, and melted into the shadows. He wasn't going home. Not yet. Keanu kept his distance as Malcolm's sedan pulled away from the curb, tail lights disappearing into the misty night. The rain had softened into a thin drizzle, quiet and cold against Keanu's face. He moved carefully, slipping between parked cars and storefront shadows, the hood of his jacket pulled low over his brow. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but he knew enough not to let the moment pass. About 15 minutes later, he spotted the car again. It was parked in the far corner of a large grocery store lot, empty at this hour except for a few delivery trucks and scattered shopping carts. The car was backed into a space near a row of dead streetlights, the kind of place that stayed out of sight. Keanu crossed the lot slowly, staying low behind an old van until he was close enough to see clearly. He stopped beneath the awning of an abandoned flower kiosk and waited. The sedan was off. No headlights, no engine running, just the faintest glow from the dashboard before it went completely dark. Inside, Malcolm was still. Keanu could make out the shape of him through the window. He had reclined the driver's seat all the way back. His jacket was zipped up to the neck, and his head rested awkwardly against a balled-up hoodie used as a pillow. A thin, frayed blanket was pulled up to his chest. The same one Keanu had once seen folded neatly in the trunk during an early morning airport pickup. On the passenger seat, barely visible in the dark, sat the napkin-wrapped toast. Keanu stepped back. The air in his lungs felt colder than it should have. He looked around the empty lot, the rows of shopping carts, the flickering security lights near the entrance, the cracked concrete beneath his boots. It was real. Malcolm, his driver, the man who showed up every day looking composed, clean-shaven, and early, was sleeping in his car. No complaints, no excuses, no missed shifts, just quiet professionalism, hiding a life unraveling behind tinted glass. Keanu stood there a moment longer, wrestling with the emotion that had risen so suddenly he hadn't had time to defend himself against it. He thought of all the times Malcolm had smiled and said, "Yes, sir." The polite nods, the long hours, the silence. He'd never once asked for help. Keanu turned away, his jaw tight. He walked back into the night without saying a word. Not because he was indifferent, but because confronting Malcolm now would only strip the man of the dignity he fought so hard to protect. Not tonight. There had to be a better way. A way to help without taking something from him. As Keanu disappeared down the dark sidewalk, the rain picked up again. But this time, it wasn't the rain that made his eyes sting. The next morning, the image of Malcolm sleeping in his car stayed with Keanu like a stone in his chest. Even as he stepped onto the set and greeted the crew, something inside him hadn't shifted back to normal. He went through makeup, reviewed the day's lines, smiled when he needed to, but underneath, his mind was elsewhere. It wasn't just sympathy that gripped him. It was something deeper, a gnawing understanding. The way Malcolm had protected his secret so carefully, the way he worked with unwavering discipline despite what he returned to at night. It wasn't just sad, it was humbling. During a short break in filming, Keanu stepped aside and pulled out his phone. He scrolled down to one of his most trusted contacts, Celia Harper, his longtime executive assistant. She had been with him for years, and he knew she'd never ask unnecessary questions. He called her directly. "Hey, Keanu," she said, answering on the second ring. "Morning. Can I ask you for a favor?" "Of course, anything." "It's about my driver, Malcolm Torres. I need to know more about him. Quietly. No one else needs to know." Celia paused for a second, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, just trust me." "Can you see what you can find? Employment history, education, whatever's available. I'm not trying to invade his privacy. I just have a feeling he's been through more than he's let on." "I'll look into it," she said, discreetly. "Thank you." They ended the call and Keanu returned to set. He gave a solid performance in the next scene, though his delivery carried more weight than usual. It wasn't intentional. He just couldn't unsee what he had seen the night before. A man curled up in the backseat of a car, trying to keep warm with nothing but a thin blanket and a folded slice of toast. Late that afternoon, as the crew reset for the final shot of the day, Keanu's phone buzzed. A message from Celia. "Got some info. Can I come by in person?" "No email. Too personal." Keanu replied with a quick yes and texted the address of his trailer. 10 minutes later, Celia knocked softly on the door and stepped inside with a manila folder in her hand. She closed the door behind her and lowered her voice. "I ran a basic background check. I didn't dig too deep, just enough to answer your question." Keanu nodded, already bracing himself. She opened the folder and began reading. "Malcolm Torres, 32 years old, born in Bakersfield. No criminal record, no complaints on file with his employer. In fact, every review says the same thing. Punctual, respectful, professional." Keanu wasn't surprised. "But here's where it gets interesting," Celia continued. "He enrolled in an electrical engineering program at Riverside Community College when he was 21. Maintained a 3.8 GPA for almost 3 years. Then suddenly he dropped out. No degree, no transfer." Keanu's brow furrowed. "Way?" he asked. "I found a note in a student directory from that time. Withdrew due to family emergency." That's all it said. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the folder in Celia's hands. That phrase, family emergency, echoed in his mind like a bell struck softly but deeply. "Did you find out what that emergency was?" he asked. Celia nodded and flipped to the next page. It was his mother, Rita Torres. She was diagnosed with late-stage pancreatic cancer. From what I could gather, Malcolm was her only family. He dropped everything to take care of her, sold his car, quit school, picked up night shifts as a hospital orderly and security guard. Everything went into covering her treatment. Keanu's chest tightened. He'd known there was more to Malcolm's story, but this was different. This wasn't just a man down on his luck. This was a man who had sacrificed everything for someone he loved. "Celia passed away 2 years ago," Celia continued. "After that, it looks like he tried to go back to school, but the debt was too heavy. Student loans, hospital bills. I found court documents showing that he was evicted from his apartment about 18 months ago. Since then, no stable address listed." Keanu felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. "He's been living in his car since then," he said quietly. "Yes, working 2 jobs to try and get back on his feet. The driving service during the day, food delivery at night. Every time I've seen him, he's clean, shaved, well-dressed," Keanu said. "I never would have guessed." Celia closed the folder and met his eyes. "That's what stood out to me. He's been doing everything right. No begging, no complaints, just working. And surviving. Keanu was silent for a long moment. The trailer around them was still, the only sound a faint buzz from the overhead lights. He stared at a spot on the table in front of him, but his mind was elsewhere. Back in that parking lot, watching a man sleep upright in the driver's seat of a cold sedan with half a slice of toast in his pocket. He's not just surviving, Keanu said finally. He's fighting, every day, and nobody even sees it. Celia didn't respond. She didn't need to. The silence between them was full of quiet understanding. Keanu stood up and paced slowly toward the window. Rain had started again, gentle now, dotting the glass with faint streaks. "I'm going to do something," he said, "but not in a way that embarrasses him. He's worked too hard to hold on to his dignity." Celia gave a small nod. "You'll find the right way. You always do." Keanu turned back to her, his voice calm but certain, because people like Malcolm shouldn't be invisible. Later that night, Keanu sat alone in his home office, the file Celia had given him resting quietly beside his keyboard. He hadn't opened it again. He didn't need to. The story was already etched into his thoughts, the student who had walked away from a promising future to care for his dying mother. The son who gave everything, and when there was nothing left, kept working anyway. Quietly, unseen, he looked out the window at the Los Angeles skyline, glittering in the distance. There were thousands of stories buried in that light, and Malcolm's was one of them. Keanu had never believed in solving things with flash. A check might solve a moment, but not a life. Malcolm had never once asked for help, and Keanu wasn't about to rob him of the pride he had managed to protect through everything. But what if there was a way to give him something he had already earned? Without pity, without shame. Not a handout. A door. One Malcolm could walk through on his own terms. Keanu pulled out a notebook and began scribbling ideas. He thought about his own team, the tech consultants he'd hired for his latest film, the sound engineers, the lighting experts. He remembered a recent problem they'd had with overheating power packs on set. A complicated issue. And Malcolm had studied electrical engineering. There was potential here, but it had to be done carefully, thoughtfully. The next morning, Keanu called Celia. "I want to offer him something, a part-time technical assistant role, light work at first, something he can do around his driving hours." Celia didn't hesitate. "You want me to draw up a contract?" "No. Not yet. I want to see how he reacts to the opportunity before we make it official. No pressure, no fanfare, just a quiet offer. I'll put together a shadow role, discreet, paid, but casual." "Perfect." Keanu paused. "Also, find him a studio apartment. Something clean, furnished, but modest. I'll cover 6 months' rent anonymously. I don't want him to know it's from me. I just want him to have somewhere to sleep that isn't the back seat of a car." Celia's voice softened. "You've got it." As he ended the call, Keanu looked again at the photo taped to the side of his computer. One of his mother when he was a teenager. She'd always told him to pay attention to people who stayed kind in hard times, who kept working, who never made excuses. People like Malcolm Torres. Keanu leaned back in his chair, folded his hands, and took a deep breath. This wasn't about charity. This was about recognition. The following morning, Keanu stepped out of his home just after sunrise. The air was cool and crisp, a rare softness settling over Los Angeles before the city fully woke. Malcolm's sedan waited, as it always did, parked neatly at the curb. The car's windows were spotless, the tires lined up exactly with the sidewalk. A man of detail, even after sleeping in the back seat. Keanu opened the rear door and slid in. "Morning, sir," Malcolm said, glancing in the mirror. "Morning, Malcolm. You get any rest?" "A few hours, enough." Keanu nodded, fastening his seatbelt. Headed to the production office on Sunset, he said, then added casually, "Mind if I ask you something?" "Of course not," Malcolm replied, pulling the car into traffic. Keanu kept his voice easy, as if he were just filling time. "I've been thinking about a problem one of the tech guys mentioned. Something with our camera battery packs overheating on night shoots. You ever hear of a solution for lithium-based battery cooling? Something simple but effective?" Malcolm was silent for a moment, the sound of tires humming over pavement filling the space. "That's a bit outside my field," he said cautiously. "You've got a field?" Keanu asked, playing it light. Malcolm hesitated. "I studied electrical engineering. A while ago, never finished." Keanu smiled slightly. "You still read up on it?" Malcolm nodded once. "When I can. Mostly online journals, some academic articles. Keeps the brain from rusting." Keanu leaned forward. "So, what do you think? Cooling methods? What's the smartest direction right now?" Malcolm gripped the wheel a little tighter, uncertain if this was a real question or just polite curiosity. But Keanu was looking at him through the mirror, steady, patient, waiting. "Well," Malcolm said slowly, "traditional air cooling has limits. It's cheap, but inefficient at high charge rates. Liquid cooling is more promising, especially if you can optimize the thermal management software to throttle load before thermal runaway occurs." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like something you've actually tested?" "Just read about it. There's a study from last year on hybrid phase change materials that improve dissipation during peak draw. The problem is cost. Most setups that work in labs aren't practical in the field." "But," he trailed off. "But what?" Keanu asked. "If the battery casing can act as a passive heat sink, aluminum composite maybe, you could reduce internal temps without adding weight or new fluid channels. It's not perfect, but it's scalable." Keanu gave a small nod, looking out the window like he was just passing the time. "Interesting. You ever miss it? The engineering stuff?" Malcolm didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "Every day." The rest of the drive passed in thoughtful silence. Keanu didn't press further, and Malcolm didn't elaborate. But the moment had been real, brief, unforced, and revealing. By the time they reached the production office, the morning sun had started to stretch across the rooftops, casting long shadows over the city. "Thanks for the ride, Malcolm," Keanu said as he stepped out of the car. "Of course, sir." Keanu paused before closing the door. "And, hey, I appreciate your insight. You know more than most of the guys I've paid to solve this." Malcolm offered a polite nod, but his eyes flicked away, unsure how to respond. Compliments weren't something he knew what to do with anymore. Keanu closed the door and watched the car pull away before he turned and entered the building. As the day wore on, he thought about the quiet confidence in Malcolm's voice. Not arrogance, not hesitation either. Just the kind of insight that comes from someone who still studies for the love of it, even when life doesn't make space for ambition. That evening, back at home, Keanu opened his laptop and pulled up a few research papers he'd read months ago. Thermal regulation in compact battery designs. Adaptive heat shielding for consumer electronics. He downloaded 5 of them, some technical, some theoretical, and opened a new email window. He typed in a temporary, anonymous email address he'd created that afternoon. The subject line read, "Interesting reads, thought you might like these." No signature, no clue who it was from. Just 5 well-curated attachments and a quiet message beneath. "For a curious mind, keep learning." He sent it to the email tied to Malcolm's driver profile, an account used for shift updates and scheduling confirmations. He didn't expect a reply. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about starting a conversation. It was about lighting a match. 2 hours later, Malcolm parked in his usual spot at the edge of the grocery store lot. The rain had stopped and the air was still. He shut off the engine and leaned his head back, rubbing his temples. The day had been long. His second job had just ended, 3 hours of food delivery and stop-and-go traffic, and his stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten more than a granola bar since noon. He took a breath and reached into the glove box, pulling out his phone to check for messages. A new email blinked at the top of the screen. No name, just the strange subject line. He opened it, skeptical, and stared. He read the first paper twice before he realized he was smiling, not because of what it said, but because someone, somewhere, had seen him. Malcolm shifted in his seat, wiping condensation from the inside of the window before grabbing his flashlight from the cup holder. He turned it on and angled it toward the dashboard, careful not to draw attention in the dark parking lot. Then he reached into his worn backpack, pulled out a spiral notebook, and began taking notes. He scribbled quietly, absorbing the terminology like oxygen. Graphene composite layers, PCM integrated shells, battery degradation rates over a 5-year life cycle. It wasn't just reading, it was remembering who he used to be, who he still was. Under the fatigue, under the daily grind, under the silence. As he flipped to the next paper, something shifted in him. These weren't random documents. They were specific, targeted. Whoever had sent them hadn't picked generic material. These were advanced, relevant, and tied directly to the conversation he'd had with Keanu that morning. He paused, the pen in his hand hovering over the page. Could it be him? No. That didn't make sense. Keanu Reeves had a dozen people around him every day. Assistants, producers, agents. He wouldn't have time to send academic papers to his driver. Not unless he saw something. Malcolm set the pen down, his breath visible in the cold air. He sat back and stared at the roof of the car for a long moment. The hum of the city was distant here, replaced by the occasional rustle of leaves and the soft tap of a plastic bag caught on a nearby cart return. The world had gone quiet, and yet, in that silence, Malcolm felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was subtle, fragile, but it was there. He read for 2 more hours, circling formulas, making margin notes, drafting quick models in shorthand. For a moment, it was like being back in the lab, back in school, back before everything fell apart. His flashlight flickered once, then dimmed. The batteries were dying. He clicked it off, folded his notes and tucked them under the driver's seat, next to the wrapped toast from earlier. Then he pulled the blanket over his chest and reclined the seat again. But this time, as he looked up at the ceiling, he didn't feel the usual weight of the night pressing in. Something had changed. He didn't know who had sent those articles, but whoever it was had seen through the surface, past the uniform, past the silence. They had looked at him, not through him. Malcolm closed his eyes, the faintest smile touching the corners of his mouth. Maybe this was nothing, but maybe it was the beginning of something he thought he'd lost forever. 2 days later, Malcolm received a message from Keanu's assistant, Celia. It was brief and unexpected. Hi, Malcolm. Mr. Reeves needs transportation to Burbank tomorrow morning. Pick up at 7:30 a.m. Please be prepared to remain on site for a few hours afterward. Dress comfortably but appropriately for an indoor studio meeting. You'll be sitting in. That last sentence made him reread the message twice. You'll be sitting in. Sitting in on what? Malcolm stared at the screen, then quickly glanced at the timestamp. It wasn't a mistake. The instructions were deliberate, polite, professional. He didn't ask questions. He never did. Instead, he laid out his best shirt and slacks that night, brushing the collar to make sure there were no wrinkles. He polished his shoes in the front seat of his car with an old sock, then folded the clean napkin he always kept in the glove box. The next morning, Malcolm arrived precisely on time outside Keanu's residence. The actor came out with a warm smile and a fresh cup of coffee in each hand. To the road for the road, Keanu said, handing one to Malcolm before climbing into the back. Malcolm accepted it with a quiet thank you and started the car. The drive was long, weaving through early morning traffic and sun-blushed streets. Keanu made small talk at first, Questions about music, movies Malcolm liked growing up, even his favorite diner in the city. Malcolm answered carefully, not sure what any of it meant, but appreciative of the ease in Keanu's tone. As they pulled into the film studio's secured gate, Malcolm glanced in the mirror. "Should I wait outside, sir?" Keanu shook his head. "You're coming in. There's a short session I want you to hear." Malcolm's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. "Understood." He parked in the designated VIP slot and followed Keanu through the entrance. The lobby was bustling with people, producers with phones pressed to their ears, assistants rushing past with clipboards, technicians wheeling cases of gear down long hallways. They entered a smaller conference room tucked behind a soundstage. Inside were 5 people already seated: 2 engineers, a set lighting director, a sound tech, and a young software consultant with glasses and a digital tablet open on the table. The room buzzed with quiet focus. Keanu nodded to each of them and gestured for Malcolm to sit in the extra chair at the corner. "This is Malcolm Torres," Keanu said casually. "He's joining us today." No one questioned it. They simply offered small nods of welcome. The meeting began. It was about the next month's shooting schedule, specifically the implementation of new high-efficiency portable battery units for long outdoor scenes. The equipment team had been struggling with battery overheating in the desert and inconsistent audio sync during extreme heat waves. Malcolm listened, silent at first, hands folded in his lap, but he was listening closely. The engineers began discussing possible cooling mechanisms, mostly relying on existing systems with minor tweaks. One of them suggested increasing the size of the casing to allow for more air circulation. Another proposed rotating out the packs every 2 hours, though that would slow down production. Keanu leaned back, his arms folded, listening quietly. Then, as the room reached a lull, he turned toward Malcolm. "You've been quiet," Keanu said with a faint smile. "What do you think?" Every head turned. Malcolm blinked, caught mid-thought. "Me?" "Yes, you," Keanu said. "You know a little something about this kind of challenge, right?" Malcolm sat straighter, the collar of his shirt suddenly tight. I don't want to overstep, sir. I'm just a driver." Keanu shook his head. "You're someone who reads engineering journals in a parked car after midnight. That's not just anything." There was a long pause. Then Malcolm nodded, exhaled slowly, and spoke. "Most of the current solutions assume the failure is purely environmental. But battery packs fail under 2 pressures: heat accumulation and current inefficiency. You don't need to increase the size of the casing. You need to reduce internal impedance and balance current loads across parallel modules. That'll cut heat without adding bulk." The room went silent. One of the engineers sat up straighter. "That's actually not far off from a paper we saw last quarter from the Kyoto Institute." The software tech chimed in. "Are you talking about passive harmonic load balancing?" "Yes," Malcolm said, gaining confidence. "But not the basic model. If you modify the software to stagger voltage draw across redundant channels, you can stabilize the discharge curve even under temperature spikes." Now everyone was listening. Keanu glanced around the table, watching how quickly the tone shifted. The room, which had started with mild fatigue and routine discussion, now buzzed with focused curiosity. A few people started typing notes. One engineer flipped open his laptop to run a quick simulation model. Malcolm didn't dominate the conversation. He simply answered when asked. He clarified when prompted. And above all, he listened with respect. But he knew what he was talking about, and the room began to recognize that quickly. Keanu said very little after that. He just watched. Watched the way Malcolm came alive when asked the right question. Watched the way he sat forward when someone brought up a challenge, his mind already working behind calm eyes. Watched the subtle transformation, quiet but undeniable, of a man who had been invisible for too long, finally being seen. This wasn't just about batteries. It was about belief. The meeting wrapped just under an hour later, but the energy in the room had changed. Instead of routine handshakes and exit strategies, there were side conversations, ideas being tossed back and forth. Two of the engineers lingered to speak with Malcolm directly, asking for his thoughts on a few past cooling models. He answered each question thoughtfully, never overstating, never assuming, just sharing what he knew. Keanu stayed by the door, letting it all unfold naturally. Eventually, the room cleared out. Malcolm turned back toward Keanu, looking a little unsure now that the momentum had faded. "I hope I didn't speak out of turn." "You didn't," Keanu said simply. "I wasn't expecting to be asked. That's why I asked." Malcolm gave a small nod and looked down at the floor. "Thank you for letting me be part of that." "You weren't let in," Keanu replied. "You earned your seat." Malcolm didn't speak again as they walked back to the car, his steps quieter than usual. When they got in, the silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of distance. It was the silence of processing, of new doors creaking open. Keanu sat back in the seat and glanced out at the sun-drenched lot before saying, "You've got a gift. I hope you're not the only one who realizes it now." Malcolm smiled faintly. "To be honest, I almost forgot I had anything to offer." Keanu didn't reply. He just gave a small nod, the kind that said, "I didn't." As they pulled away from the studio lot, Malcolm gripped the wheel with a little more steadiness. His chin lifted just slightly, and for the first time in years, the road ahead didn't feel like a dead end. He didn't know what would come next. But for the first time in a very long time, he was ready for the challenge. The car ride back from the studio was quiet. Not tense, not awkward, just still. Malcolm kept his hands steady on the wheel, but his mind raced. He replayed the meeting in his head, the questions, the nods, the surprised glances when he spoke. He'd been in rooms like that once years ago, but always as a student, never as a peer. And yet today, something had shifted. As they neared the west side of town, Keanu spoke up from the back seat. "Do you have a few extra minutes?" "Of course," Malcolm replied quickly. "There's a coffee shop I like, quiet place. Let's stop there." Malcolm adjusted course without question. A few minutes later, they pulled up in front of a small corner cafe tucked between a bookstore and a laundromat. It wasn't trendy or loud, just warm, with wide windows and the scent of fresh coffee drifting out the door. Inside, Keanu waved off the cashier's polite attempt to comp his drink and ordered 2 black coffees. He nodded toward a corner booth, and Malcolm followed. They sat down, the hum of soft music filling the silence. Keanu let a moment pass before speaking. "I want to tell you something," he said gently. Malcolm's shoulders tensed. Keanu looked at him evenly. "I know about the parking lot, about the car, the blanket, the toast you save for later." Malcolm's eyes dropped instantly. His hands, once resting on the table, curled into themselves. "I wasn't spying," Keanu said. "I just noticed things. I had someone look into your background, your school records, your mother's care history, the jobs you've taken, the debt." Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, the heat rising in his chest. Shame pressed hard against his ribs. The table between them suddenly felt like a spotlight. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I never meant to bring that into your life. I try to keep it separate, professional." "I know," Keanu replied. "You never asked for anything, not once." Malcolm opened his mouth, but no words came. "You did everything right," Keanu continued. "You gave up your future for someone you loved. You didn't complain. You didn't steal, lie, or hurt anyone. You just kept showing up. That's not weakness, Malcolm. That's strength." Malcolm shook his head slowly. "It doesn't feel like strength when you're brushing your teeth in a gas station." Keanu didn't smile, didn't try to soften it. "I believe you." He reached into his coat and slid a small envelope across the table. "This is a job offer. Part-time technical consultant. Flexible hours. Pay that matches your experience. It's connected to the film you helped with today." Malcolm stared at the envelope like it was a live wire. "There's also housing included," Keanu added. A small place, nothing fancy, but clean, safe. And yours. No strings. Malcolm looked up, eyes wide. Why? Keanu folded his hands and said softly, because it's not charity, it's belief. Malcolm didn't reach for the envelope. Not right away. He just sat there, trying to make sense of what was happening. The soft clatter of coffee cups and low chatter from nearby tables felt far away, like a background hum in another world. He cleared his throat. I'm not sure I can accept this. Keanu didn't flinch. Why not? Malcolm looked away, his fingers brushing the edge of the table. Because it feels like I didn't earn it. Like I'm being rescued. You weren't rescued today, Keanu said. You contributed. You offered real value. You solved a problem that professionals couldn't crack. That wasn't pity, that was skill. I don't want to be someone's project, Malcolm whispered. You're not, Keanu said calmly. You're someone who got knocked down by life. It happens. To good people. You got back up anyway. That deserves more than survival. It deserves opportunity. Malcolm ran a hand over his face, trying to slow the spin in his head. I've been told no so many times, he said. No funding, no job, no housing. People see the clothes, the car, and they assume the worst. They look right through you. I didn't, Keanu replied. You showed me who you were. You didn't need a speech. You just needed a moment. Malcolm looked at the envelope again. I don't know how to start over. Keanu's voice dropped to a near whisper. You don't have to. Just start forward. That quiet phrase settled between them. Malcolm took a breath. Then he slowly reached for the envelope. His hand shook a little as he opened it, pulling out a neatly folded letter printed on official letterhead. The offer was real. Signed, the terms were clear. A modest salary, free housing for 1 year, a 3-month probation period, extendable based on performance. The expectations were technical but fair, challenging but reachable. There was no fluff, no condescension, just belief. He folded the letter again and slid it back into the envelope. Then he placed it flat on the table and looked Keanu in the eye. I want to say yes, he said, but I don't want this to change how you see me. Keanu offered the faintest smile. It already has. You're not just my driver, Malcolm. You're an engineer. You're a fighter. You're someone I'm proud to have on my team. Malcolm blinked hard, then nodded once, not as a man accepting help, but as a man taking a step. Keanu raised his coffee cup slightly. To forward, he said. Malcolm lifted his own. To forward. They sat for a while after that, not needing to say much. The kind of silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, grounded. Malcolm looked out the window for a moment and saw the world a little differently than he had an hour ago. The sidewalk didn't look as cold. The traffic didn't seem as loud. Even the drizzle on the glass had a kind of rhythm to it, steady and manageable. I haven't had steady housing in 4 years, Malcolm said quietly. I forgot what it's like to leave something in a drawer and know it'll be there the next day. Keanu nodded, not trying to fill the space with answers, just listening. I used to dream in color, Malcolm added, his voice soft. Big things, designs, projects. But the longer I stayed in survival mode, the more it faded, like someone dimmed the lights on purpose. And now? Keanu asked. Malcolm met his eyes. Now I feel like someone turned the power back on. A small smile passed between them. Keanu reached into his coat once more and handed Malcolm a plain business card. If you decide to accept the offer officially, call that number tomorrow. They'll walk you through everything. Move-in details, access credentials, paperwork. Malcolm turned the card over in his hand like it was made of glass. I'll call. Keanu finished the last of his coffee and stood. Then I'll see you soon, just in a different seat. Malcolm stood too, unsure of what to say that would be enough. Gratitude was too small a word. Respect felt too formal. But what he did offer came from somewhere deep, somewhere long buried. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. Keanu nodded once. "Thanks for not hiding." They stepped outside together, the sky overcast but no longer raining. Keanu's car was parked just up the street, and as they walked toward it, Malcolm felt something loosening inside him. Not disappearing, just finally letting go. By the time they reached the curb, Keanu paused. "You want to drive one last time before the next chapter starts?" he asked. Malcolm smiled. "I'd like that." He opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and for the first time in years, his hands didn't shake when they touched the wheel. The city didn't look like a battlefield anymore. It looked like a place he could rebuild in. They drove off together, not into a sunset, but into something better. An open road. The following evening, after a quiet wrap on set and an easy drive across town, Keanu asked Malcolm to pull into a quiet neighborhood just outside Silver Lake. Tree-lined streets, old bungalows, apartments with ivy-covered stairwells and balconies that overlooked courtyards full of planters and cats. Malcolm slowed the car, puzzled. "Here?" Keanu nodded. "Yeah, let's get out for a minute." They stepped onto the sidewalk. The sun was dipping low, casting amber light through the leaves above. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and pavement, the kind of peaceful mix only found in older neighborhoods after a warm day. Keanu motioned to a narrow staircase leading up to a second-floor unit. At the top was a red door with chipped paint, the number 208 faintly visible on the frame. He pulled a key from his pocket and handed it to Malcolm. "I rented this last week," Keanu said calmly. "It's paid through the next 6 months. You can move in tonight if you want." Malcolm stared at the key in his hand. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Keanu replied. "Use it or don't, but no one should have to sleep in their car." The words landed heavier than Malcolm expected. They weren't dramatic, they weren't pitying, just true, just kind. Malcolm swallowed hard and nodded, not trusting his voice. He stared up at the door for a long moment. Then, down at the key again. "I'll walk back," Keanu said. "Take your time, get familiar." Malcolm blinked. "You're just leaving me here?" "You've got a key, that means it's yours now." Keanu offered a quiet smile and turned back down the stairs, leaving Malcolm alone with the door and the future he didn't expect. Malcolm climbed the steps slowly, one hand still holding the key, the other running along the wooden banister. When he reached the top, he paused in front of the door. He hadn't stood in front of a place that was truly his in years, not since he lost the lease on the apartment he'd shared with his mother, after her medical bills ate up every last savings account and credit line he had. Now he stood still, heart racing, unable to move. Then, gently, he slid the key into the lock. The door opened with a soft click, and Malcolm stepped inside. It was small, clean, the kind of place someone had taken care to prepare. A fresh bar of soap sat on the bathroom counter. A small stack of towels waited neatly folded by the closet. The kitchenette had a few basics stocked: rice, beans, coffee, and 2 mugs. A bed sat beneath the window, made up in simple gray sheets. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Malcolm closed the door behind him and leaned against it, letting the silence settle. There was no traffic outside, no overhead pipes creaking from someone else's footsteps, no glare from passing cars, just stillness. He stood there for several minutes without moving, just listening to the absence of chaos. Then slowly he walked the length of the apartment. He ran his fingers over the countertop, testing the stove knobs, opening the fridge. It was small but cold and humming. He opened a cabinet and found a pan, not new, but clean, reliable. He turned on the faucet and let the water run over his hands. Warm, steady. Nothing flickering or sputtering like the rest-stop sinks he was used to. In the mirror above the sink, he barely recognized the man looking back at him. His eyes were tired, yes, but tonight they weren't hollow. He moved to the bed and sat on the edge. It creaked softly under his weight. He bounced once, testing the feel of it. Then he reached down, took off his shoes slowly, and laid back fully. He didn't even realize how tight his chest had been until it started to loosen. With each breath, the weight he'd carried every night sleeping upright in the driver's seat, every early morning splash of cold water in public restrooms, every meal, split in half for tomorrow, began to slip off. And then it hit him. The kind of crying that doesn't start with a sound, just the sudden sting in the eyes, the heat in the chest, the lump in the throat that rises until you can't hold it in anymore. He rolled onto his side and buried his face into the pillow, trying to muffle it, but the emotion came anyway. Tears soaked into the fabric. He wasn't embarrassed. There was no one here to judge, no one to perform strength for. Just him, the room, and the realization that for the first time in years, he wasn't surviving. He was safe. After a while, the tears stopped on their own. He stayed there, staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting gently as the sun fully disappeared. He could have stayed in that stillness forever. But eventually, he sat up, walked to the kitchenette, and brewed himself a cup of coffee with the little tin Keanu had left. He drank it sitting at the window, the city whispering below, his key resting beside the mug on the sill. Tomorrow would come, but tonight, he was home. Later that night, Malcolm took a slow walk around the apartment once more, just to make sure it was real. He flicked the lights off and on, opened and closed the cabinets again. It wasn't a dream. He wasn't going to wake up cold in the driver's seat, neck stiff, feet swollen. There were small details that nearly broke him all over again. A single framed photo of a winding forest road on the wall, a folded blanket at the end of the bed, a small lamp with a warm light, not the harsh flicker of street lamps through a windshield. Someone had thought this through. Keanu hadn't just offered him shelter, he'd offered dignity. Malcolm showered for the first time in a space that wasn't public. He let the water run too long, steam rising against the mirror, just to remember what warmth felt like on his skin. When he dried off, he realized there were clothes in the closet. A basic wardrobe, plain t-shirts, jeans, a button-down or two. His size, nothing flashy, just respectful. He paused in front of the mirror again. No longer the man sleeping curled in the back seat of a Prius with his feet against the window. No longer the invisible technician who gave up on himself so no one else would have to. He didn't look like a new man, but he felt like someone unfinished, in motion, climbing back up the wall he'd once fallen from. That night, he crawled into the bed, pulled the blanket to his chest, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The world was still uncertain. He still had wounds, still owed money, still carried the weight of his mother's death. But tonight, none of that could steal his sleep. His last thought before closing his eyes was a sentence he hadn't allowed himself in years. Maybe I'm not done yet. And with that, he fell into the first deep, uninterrupted sleep he'd had in over 1,000 days. No sirens, no headlights, no alarms set, just quiet, just rest, just a key in his pocket, and a door that would still be there in the morning. Malcolm showed up early on his first day. Not in a suit or anything fancy, just a clean t-shirt, fitted jeans, and sturdy sneakers. He carried a small notebook tucked into his back pocket and a plain black backpack that had seen better years. But his eyes were focused, steady, not wide with fear, not dimmed by exhaustion. He was awake in a way he hadn't felt in years. Keanu greeted him with a nod as he arrived on set. "Glad you're here," he said simply. Malcolm smiled. "Glad to be here." Keanu introduced him to a few key members of the crew, technical advisors, lighting supervisors, a young assistant director named Marissa who ran between departments like her shoes were on fire. Nobody asked where Malcolm came from, they just saw a man with purpose who moved like he belonged. His first assignment was small. A portable rig wasn't drawing power evenly from the generator, and the lighting team had been adjusting things manually to avoid a flicker during shots. Malcolm crouched next to the panel, ran his fingers over the wiring, and quietly rewired the lead without a word. 15 minutes later, the flicker was gone. No drama, no explanation, just... Marissa raised an eyebrow. "What did you do?" "Cleaned up the ground loop," Malcolm said. "It was backfeeding into the dimmer chain." She blinked. Okay, that sounded like magic. Word spread fast, not in a gossipy way, but in the way that competence makes people lean in. Crew members started pulling him aside with questions. One grip asked him to look at a gimbal with a jerky motor. Another wanted help stabilizing a tracking shot using existing dolly rigs. Malcolm offered small, efficient solutions, never making it about himself. He explained only when asked. He worked like someone grateful to be included, not someone trying to prove anything. Keanu watched from a distance, arms crossed near the monitors. He didn't interfere. He didn't brag or tell anyone who Malcolm was or what he'd been through. He just watched him move like a man rebuilding something from the ground up. At lunch, Malcolm sat by himself on the edge of the lot, eating from a modest pack container. Marissa joined him, balancing her own container on her lap. "You some kind of tech wizard?" she asked casually. "Just studied electrical engineering for a while," Malcolm replied. She nodded. "You should be teaching this stuff." Malcolm gave a small smile. "Maybe one day." Keanu, standing near craft services, overheard it all, and the seed of an idea began to grow. Later that afternoon, a snag in the production gave Malcolm his next quiet opportunity. A critical night scene required precise lighting transitions, but the software controlling the rig had a latency issue, half-a-second delay that made every dimming cue look off. The team had accepted the flaw, adjusting the timing by hand. But Malcolm stood behind the control panel, silently observing the pattern. He didn't say anything at first. Then, after watching 3 takes in a row, he leaned toward the head gaffer. "Mind if I patch in a bypass?" The gaffer, skeptical but intrigued, stepped aside. Malcolm opened the unit's console housing and pulled a few jumper wires from his backpack. Within minutes, he isolated the faulty microcontroller and rerouted the pulse sequence through a passive delay compensator he configured on the fly. They ran the scene again. This time, the transitions landed with eerie precision. The actors barely noticed. The director called it the best take of the day. The gaffer turned and looked at Malcolm like he had just witnessed an illusion. "Okay, who are you?" Malcolm shrugged. "Just someone who used to fix things for a living." From across the lot, Keanu caught the look on the crew's faces. Surprise. Respect. Curiosity. All earned, not given. Back at the equipment bay, Malcolm pulled out his notebook and started sketching something. By the time wrap was called, he had drafted a new idea for a modular control board that could adapt voltage tolerances across older rig systems. Something light, simple, costy-flow. Keanu walked over as Malcolm slid the notebook back into his pack. "You designing something?" "Just tinkering," Malcolm said, not looking up. "You think it could work?" "I think it could save time and cost, especially with how often you guys rotate gear between sets." Keanu sat on the corner of the metal crate next to him. "Would you want to work on it full-time?" Malcolm paused, then looked up. "Full-time?" "On payroll, real title, real workspace." Malcolm's expression clouded, not with doubt about the job, but about himself. "I don't know if I'm ready for that. I mean, I still feel like I'm playing catch-up, like this is temporary, like maybe I don't belong." Keanu's voice was quiet, steady. "You already do." Malcolm didn't reply. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything. That night, back in his apartment, Malcolm opened his notebook again. He sketched for hours by lamplight, the designs flowing without fear. For the first time in years, his hands weren't just fixing. They were creating. By the end of the week, Malcolm's name was being passed around set like a quiet secret. He wasn't loud. He didn't talk about himself. But when a problem came up, someone always said, "Get Malcolm." Whether it was a power relay glitch, an overheating LED strip, or a strange signal interference in the camera van, Malcolm didn't just fix things, he explained them. And he did it without ego. Keanu continued watching from the background, resisting the urge to step in or draw attention. This wasn't about handouts or praise. This was about a man proving, on his own terms, what he was capable of when the obstacles were finally removed. At one point, Marisa walked up to Keanu while scanning a new call sheet. "You know," she said, "I think that guy knows more than our entire lighting team combined." Keanu smiled. "I think he's just getting started." The next day, Malcolm submitted the first official draft of his control module concept. It came with diagrams, part lists, and simulated outputs. Thorough, efficient, and field-ready. The technical team reviewed it and gave a unanimous response. This was viable. More than viable. It could save the production tens of thousands across future shoots. Keanu sat with Malcolm in the workshop after the review, both of them surrounded by circuit boards and coffee cups. "You still feel like you don't belong?" Keanu asked. Malcolm didn't answer right away. He turned the page of his notebook, looked down at the wiring diagram he'd drawn that morning, and finally said, "Less and less every day." Keanu nodded. "Good, because this crew needs someone like you, not just for what you know, but how you carry it." Malcolm took that in with a quiet breath. Then he reached into his pack and pulled out a small case. Inside was the prototype he'd been building at night, delicate, clean, and perfectly aligned. "This is what I've been working on," he said. Keanu picked it up, turning it over in his hands. "Beautiful work. It's just the first version." That's how everything great starts. For the first time, Malcolm allowed himself to smile fully. Not out of politeness, not out of relief, but because the pieces were finally connecting again, inside and out. He had a place. He had a path. And more than anything, he had permission, at last, to believe in his own future. Malcolm had just begun to breathe easier. His morning started with sunlight filtering through clean curtains. He brewed coffee on a stove that worked. He rode the bus early to set, headphones on, eyes focused on designs he was drafting in his notebook. Each day he felt a little more steady, a little more like himself, a man rebuilding. Then the envelope came. It was wedged in his mailbox among a few promotional flyers and a folded grocery store ad. But the return address made his chest tighten the second he saw it. West Providence Medical Center. He carried it inside without opening it, his hand trembling slightly. He sat at the small kitchen table and stared at it. His mother had passed 2 years ago. Cancer. The kind that moved fast and stole everything. He'd taken out every loan he could, maxed every card, sold furniture, sold their car, sold his tools. Even after she was gone, the bills kept coming, and eventually, he stopped opening them. Now, out of nowhere, this letter. New formatting. A new collections department, but the same hospital name. He peeled the envelope open, slowly, carefully, as if delaying it might soften the blow. Inside was a New Balance summary. $41,763.12. He read the number over and over. Every decimal felt like a hammer. They had recalculated and transferred outstanding charges to a new department. Attached was a friendly offer to settle for a reduced lump sum payment, with a due date circled in red. 4 weeks. He couldn't breathe. Malcolm sat frozen for nearly an hour. Then he quietly folded the letter, tucked it back into the envelope, and placed it in the drawer under the sink. He didn't throw it away, but he couldn't face it either. That night, he didn't sleep. His notebook stayed shut, his sketches unfinished, his coffee untouched the next morning. At work, he kept his head down. He still helped where he could, still answered questions, but he didn't smile. He didn't joke with Marisa. And when Keanu passed by and nodded hello, Malcolm nodded back, but his eyes were somewhere else entirely. By day 3, his energy had faded almost completely. He started skipping lunch, claiming he wasn't hungry. He avoided the workshop after hours. He barely looked up from the ground when people spoke to him. Keanu noticed immediately. On Thursday evening, just as the crew began packing up, Keanu caught a glimpse of Malcolm sitting alone on a wooden crate behind the lighting bay. The set was emptying out, but Malcolm hadn't moved for over 15 minutes. He just sat there, hands clasped, eyes staring into the dark corner of the lot. Keanu approached quietly and sat beside him, no greeting, just presence. Malcolm didn't look over. "Something's wrong," Keanu said gently. Malcolm gave a tired exhale. "It's nothing." Keanu waited. "I don't believe that." Malcolm shook his head slowly. "It's just old stuff. Stuff I thought was behind me." Keanu glanced at him. "You want to talk about it?" Malcolm finally turned, his face strained, the weight visible in every line. "It's my mom's medical debt, 40 grand. It came back. I thought it was settled. But they moved it, and now I've got a month to come up with money I don't have. Again." He paused. "It's like, just when I think I'm standing, it reaches back and pulls me under." Keanu nodded quietly, taking it in. "You're not alone," he said. Malcolm let the words settle in the air. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. He was used to being strong in silence, hiding the weight behind focus and work. But sitting beside Keanu, in the quiet of the lot, something inside him cracked. "I've worked so hard to outrun it," he said. "Every dollar I saved went to food or gas. Every dream I had got shelved because there was always something more urgent. And now, just when I thought I had a shot at something real, it's like the past won't let go." Keanu listened, eyes fixed on Malcolm. No pity, just presence. "I'm not asking for money," Malcolm added quickly. "I'm not asking for a handout. I don't know what to do." Keanu leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I know you're not asking," he said. "And I'm not offering charity, but I am offering this. Let's figure it out together." Malcolm looked over, eyes rimmed red but steady. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've been where you are," Keanu said softly. "Different circumstances, same feeling. Drowning in something bigger than you, wondering if help will ever come. I had people who stepped in. People who didn't fix it for me, but walked beside me until I could." There was a silence. Then Keanu added, "That's what I want to do. Not solve this for you, but stand with you while you solve it." Malcolm swallowed hard. "I don't know where to even begin." "Then we start small," Keanu said. "You talk to the hospital, ask for an itemized bill. Then we go over it line by line. Maybe there are charges that can be reduced. Maybe there's a foundation or advocacy group that can help. You don't need answers today. You just need motion." Malcolm let the idea sink in. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Keanu stood and reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded note card. "This is the name of someone I trust, a legal advisor who's worked with veterans and medical debt cases. Just talk to her. No strings, just information." Malcolm took the card like it was made of glass. "Pretis dis ani." "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Keanu replied. "Just keep showing up. Keep building. That's thanks enough." Malcolm looked at the note card, then at Keanu. Something in his chest loosened. Not the weight of the debt, but the isolation that came with it. He wasn't alone anymore. That night, back in his apartment, he took the envelope from the drawer under the sink and placed it on the table. He opened his laptop. He opened a document. He began, one step at a time. For the first time, not as a man hiding from the past, but as a man walking through it, with someone beside him. Malcolm stared at the phone screen, reading over the payment plan terms he had agreed to. It was brutal. A down payment of nearly $2,000 within 10 days, then bi-weekly installments stretched over 2 years, no interest. Just pressure. He'd negotiated it himself, speaking slowly and carefully to the billing department, hiding the tremble in his voice. He had no savings, no backup, but the hospital offered him a window, and he took it. He began cutting corners immediately. Lunch disappeared first. Instead of eating on set, he stayed in the tech van, sipping warm water from a thermos and pretending he had eaten earlier. Dinner shrunk next, a sandwich split in half, one part saved for the next day. He started skipping the bus and walking from his apartment to set. It took nearly an hour, but it saved $3 each way. Every penny mattered now. The change was visible. His shirt hung a little looser. He dozed off more often when things got quiet. The dark circles under his eyes returned. He stopped sketching, stopped joking. When people asked, he just smiled and said he was fine. Just tired, just focused. Keanu noticed, but he didn't press. He let Malcolm move at his own pace, trusting the process they had started together. He believed Malcolm needed to fight this last battle his own way, until he couldn't. Exactly 7 days later, Malcolm opened his mailbox and found a thin envelope from the hospital. He took it upstairs, placed it on the table, and stared at it. He already knew what it was. A confirmation, a reminder, a ticking clock. Still, he opened it. His eyes scanned the letter once, then again, then a third time. "We are writing to confirm that your outstanding balance has been satisfied in full. Your account is now closed. No further payments are required." This resolution was made possible through a private settlement arranged by an anonymous donor. Malcolm froze. His breath caught in his chest. He read it again, slowly, like someone afraid it would vanish if he blinked too hard. Anonymous donor. He didn't need to ask. He knew. The only person who knew everything. The only person who had stood beside him, not above him. Keanu hadn't said a word. No message. No signature. Just a closed account and a chance to breathe again. Malcolm sank into the chair. He didn't cry, not immediately. He just sat there, hand resting lightly on the letter, overwhelmed by something deeper than relief. It wasn't about the money. It was the silence of it, the grace, the fact that Keanu had let him fight, had watched him do everything he could, and only stepped in when he absolutely had to, not to erase the struggle, but to end the punishment. That night, Malcolm didn't sleep much, but not because of stress, because his heart was full of something it hadn't carried in a long time. And by morning, he knew what he needed to do. Malcolm sat down at the small desk in his apartment with a blank sheet of paper in front of him. He stared at it for a long time, unsure where to begin. He could have spoken to Keanu in person, but this needed space, a moment of stillness, words that wouldn't get lost in conversation. He picked up his pen and began. "Well, I don't know how to write this without sounding like I'm falling apart, but maybe that's okay. Because what you didn't just ease a burden. It pulled me out of something deeper. Something I didn't even realize I was still trapped in. You didn't just help me sleep. You helped me dream again. For a long time, I believed survival was the best I could hope for. That if I just worked hard, kept my head down, and stayed quiet, I could make it through without being a burden to anyone. I told myself that was strength. But you saw through that, and instead of calling me out, you walked with me. You never made me feel small. You never made it about pity. You gave me space to stand, to earn my way forward. And when the ground beneath me cracked again, you didn't say a word. You just laid something solid under my feet and kept going. I don't know why you believe in people the way you do, but I hope someday I can do for someone else what you did for me. The debt is gone, but the feeling you left behind, that quiet reminder that I matter, is something I'll carry forever. With more gratitude than I can put into words. Malcolm." He folded the letter carefully, slid it into an envelope, and sealed it. No address, no formal handoff. The next day, after wrapping a light fixture with the crew, he slipped it under the door of Keanu's trailer and walked away. He didn't wait for a response. He didn't need one. Because this wasn't about getting something back. It was about honoring what had already been given. Later that week, Malcolm sat in his apartment, tinkering with a new design. Something unrelated to the set. A compact, self-regulating battery unit that could power medical field equipment in rural areas. He wasn't sure what it would become. Maybe nothing. Maybe something bigger. But he was dreaming again. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He had been seen. He had been lifted. And now he was moving forward, not just because someone helped him, but because someone believed in what he could become. That made all the difference. It started with a headline. Malcolm was in the middle of his day when a grip assistant came jogging over with a phone in hand. "Dude, you're in the news," the assistant said, half laughing, half incredulous. Malcolm blinked. "What?" The screen showed a sleek entertainment tech blog article. The title read, "Keanu Reeves funds unknown engineers game-changing film tech industry buzzes." He froze. His name was in the first paragraph. They had it all. How a former driver and self-taught engineer had co-developed a revolutionary lighting control module, now being quietly tested on a major studio lot. The piece didn't focus on pity or struggle. It focused on brilliance, on invention, on how someone with no formal resume was solving real problems behind the scenes. And then the last paragraph lit his chest on fire. Sources say Reeves personally mentored and funded the project, but neither he nor the engineer have commented. Malcolm felt the world tilt for a moment. People nearby had begun reading it too. Crew members looked up from phones and laptops. A few murmured his name. One camera operator said, "Wait, Malcolm? Malcolm?" Within an hour, the whispers turned into pats on the back. Some were hesitant, respectful. Others were loud, celebratory. By noon, the article had been picked up by 3 other outlets. An assistant from another set came over asking for comment. By afternoon, Malcolm's inbox had 6 new messages, 2 from equipment manufacturers, 1 from a film school offering to collaborate, and 3 from small tech startups asking if he'd consider joining their teams full-time. It was overwhelming. He stood by the sound cart, phone clutched in hand, unsure what to do. That's when Keanu appeared. He didn't say anything at first, just walked up, handed Malcolm a warm coffee and stood beside him like always. Malcolm looked over. "Did you know?" he asked. Keanu nodded once. "I knew it would come out eventually, but I didn't plan this. Someone leaked it." Malcolm let out a breath. "I don't know what to do with all this." Keanu smiled faintly. "Start by accepting that it's real. Then decide what part of it you want to carry forward." Later that evening, Keanu gathered the entire film crew on set. It was impromptu. No announcement, no press, just a circle of workers, grips, gaffers, production designers, sound engineers, assistants, standing quietly as Keanu stepped into the center with Malcolm at his side. "I want to say something," Keanu began. "You've all probably read the article. You've seen the headlines. But I want to tell you the part they didn't include." The crew leaned in, curious. "This story isn't about one invention or one man's brilliance. It's about what happens when we stop looking at people for where they came from and start looking at them for what they carry inside." He gestured gently toward Malcolm. "This man used to open my door every night after long shoots. Quiet, respectful, and I almost missed it. I almost missed the mind behind the manners, but thankfully, I didn't." The crew was silent, listening intently. Helma didn't ask for anything. He worked, he learned, he helped, and when given a chance, he built something that may change how we make movies. Keanu looked around the circle. There are people like him everywhere. People who don't fit the mold, who don't speak loudly, but who burn with ideas. If we don't make space for them, we lose more than innovation. We lose humanity. Keanu's voice softened, but somehow carried even more weight. We work in an industry that chases stars. But the truth is, real brilliance rarely announces itself. It waits. It listens. And sometimes, it drives you home without ever saying a word. A few people chuckled softly at that. Malcolm looked down, the corners of his mouth twitching, eyes misty. Keanu turned to face him, then addressed the crew again. Malcolm didn't just build a lighting control system. He built it after working 2 jobs, after sleeping in a car, after carrying debts that weren't his to begin with. He built it because he couldn't not build it. That's not just intelligence. That's resilience. The crowd began to murmur again. A few whispered, "Wow." Someone in the back clapped, then another. Soon, the entire crew was applauding, not loud or forced, but with real weight. Respectful, honest, the kind of applause that sinks deep. Malcolm didn't speak. He just nodded in quiet thanks, lips pressed tight, heart full. The next morning, the video of Keanu's speech hit the internet. Someone had filmed it on their phone and posted it with the caption, "Keanu Reeves' quietest speech, and maybe his most important." The clip spread like wildfire. Not because of celebrity gossip, not because of drama, but because of truth. Viewers across the world left comments not about the invention, but about the humility, the kindness, the reminder that brilliance often lives in silence, that people matter more than titles, that compassion is not weakness, but strength in its most patient form. Malcolm's inbox tripled in one day. A tech incubator in San Francisco invited him to speak. A university offered a full scholarship, no questions asked. A producer in Germany wanted to collaborate on a renewable energy project for mobile film sets. But amid all the noise, Malcolm stayed grounded. He still showed up on time, still helped the crew haul cables, still took notes in the margins of his sketches. Keanu? He stayed the same. No interviews, no press statements. Just a quiet presence at the edge of every opportunity, nudging it forward like a stone skipping across calm water, one ripple at a time. The world had seen what Keanu already knew, that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who carry the answers we didn't know we needed. And sometimes all it takes is someone willing to look a little closer. The press conference wasn't glamorous. It wasn't held at a film premiere or a luxury hotel ballroom. Instead, Keanu chose a quiet rooftop garden overlooking a Los Angeles community college campus. The backdrop was simple: potted greenery, a white banner with one word on it, Lighthouse. The seats were filled with journalists, but also students, tech apprentices, and blue-collar workers invited personally by Keanu's team. Some had never attended anything like this before. Most didn't know what to expect. Keanu stood behind the podium without a script. He looked calm, focused. Then he began. We live in a world that celebrates visibility, fame, credentials, resumes, but sometimes the brightest lights are hidden. Sometimes the most brilliant minds are driving night shifts, stocking shelves, or fixing wiring in silence. He paused. I was lucky enough to meet one of those lights, and it changed how I see everything. There were cameras clicking, pens moving, but for a moment, the garden was still. So today, I'm proud to announce the launch of something new, something we're calling the Lighthouse Initiative, a fellowship designed to find and support untapped talent, people with skill, passion, and vision who've been left behind by traditional systems. He nodded gently. It's not charity, it's recognition. Then Keanu stepped aside and motioned toward someone waiting off to the side. Malcolm. The room clapped politely, then louder when they realized who he was. His photo had run alongside the tech article that went viral. Some knew his story, some didn't. But all of them watched as he stepped toward the podium, visibly nervous, hands stiff at his sides. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he looked out over the crowd, at the young man in a mechanic's uniform, at the woman clutching a notepad with grease under her fingernails, at the rows of unpolished shoes and hopeful eyes. He saw himself. When Malcolm finally leaned toward the microphone, his voice was quiet, steady. "I used to sleep in a car 2 blocks from here. I'd park near a bakery because I liked the smell in the morning. It reminded me I was still alive." The audience didn't laugh. They didn't fidget. They just listened. I didn't think anyone would ever ask me what I thought about anything. So I studied in silence. I built in the dark. I convinced myself I didn't mind. He looked down briefly, then back up. But then someone did ask, and everything changed. Malcolm explained the program, not as an expert, but as its first beneficiary. He spoke about creating opportunities that don't start with applications or interviews, but with invitations, real conversations. He talked about using the first round of funding to provide workshops, temporary housing, laptops, mentorship. He ended with one sentence: "We're not just looking for potential, we're looking for people who never stopped trying, even when the world stopped looking." The applause was different this time. It wasn't polite or staged, it was full, honest, deeply human. But after the event ended, as the crowd thinned and cameras shut off, Malcolm stood in the quiet, staring at the banner, alone. Keanu approached. Malcolm shook his head slowly. "I'm not ready for this. Not all of it. Not yet." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're the reason it exists." The next few weeks moved fast. Keanu's foundation provided seed funding. Malcolm was assigned a small but passionate team, young professionals, many of whom had unconventional journeys of their own. They worked out of a modest office tucked inside a co-working space downtown. No marble floors, no nameplates, just whiteboards filled with notes, laptops running hot, and a bulletin board plastered with stories of people waiting to be seen. They called their first mission Project Northlight. The goal was to find 5 individuals across the city with talent that had gone unseen. Artists without galleries, coders without degrees, mechanics with untested inventions. Malcolm poured himself into the work. He read every submission personally, interviewed candidates face to face. He didn't look for polish. He looked for fire. That restless hunger he recognized so well. One candidate was a mother of 3 who had reverse-engineered an irrigation system from scrap to keep her community garden alive through drought. Another was a young man recently released from prison who had taught himself to repair circuit boards using old radios. A third was a high school dropout who had developed a software patch for accessibility tools that even professionals hadn't cracked. Each story cracked something open in Malcolm. He saw echoes of his past, struggles he had buried, strength he had underestimated. At night, after the office emptied, he would sometimes sit alone by the window and think back to the first night he shared toast with Keanu at that all-night diner. How simple it seemed now, how profound it had become. One Friday afternoon, after finalizing their first official cohort of fellows, Malcolm called Keanu. "You busy?" he asked. Keanu chuckled softly. "Define busy." Malcolm said nothing, just paused. Then, "I think we're ready. We've got 5, and they're exactly who this was meant for." Keanu responded without hesitation. "Then I'll be there Monday. Let's welcome them together." That Monday, the 5 new fellows arrived, unsure what to expect. They walked into the room carrying notebooks, nervous eyes, and hope held close like a fragile thing. Malcolm stood at the front, not as a savior, not as a boss, but as a mirror. He welcomed them one by one, told them they were already enough, that this wasn't the beginning of charity, it was the continuation of belief. When Keanu entered the room, there was no speech, no formal address, just a quiet nod to each person, and a sentence that stuck with them for the rest of their lives. "You belong here, and the world is better for it." In the months that followed, the Lighthouse Initiative would become more than a project. It became a movement. But it all began with a man who drove a car, slept in silence, and never gave up. And another man who noticed. Malcolm stood outside a modest auto shop on the edge of East LL, the sun just beginning to climb above the rooftops. A dusty fan hummed behind the shop's open garage door, pushing warm air into the street. Inside, sparks flew from under the hood of a battered pickup truck as a man in his early 50s adjusted something beneath the engine. "Felix Morales?" Malcolm asked. The man turned slowly, lifting his safety goggles with grease-smudged fingers. His face was lean, hardened by work and time, but his eyes were bright, curious. "Yeah. You're the guy who called about the program?" Malcolm nodded. "You built that modular hybrid converter using salvaged parts from city buses, right?" Felix shrugged. "Just tinkering. Doesn't always work." Malcolm smiled. "That's exactly why I'm here." He explained the Lighthouse Initiative, how they were seeking mines that had slipped through the cracks. Felix listened silently, his arms crossed. Suspicious at first, but as Malcolm outlined the support, the workshops, and the real opportunities, not just charity, the walls began to fall. "You don't owe me anything," Malcolm finished. "Just promise you'll use your gift." Felix exhaled slowly. "I've been waiting my whole life for someone to say that." Later that week, Malcolm rode the train out toward Compton. He met Jordan, a 17-year-old foster kid who had built drones from discarded electronics in plastic bottles. When Malcolm arrived at the community center, Jordan was outside, guiding one of his drones between the branches of a massive oak tree. "Is that duct tape?" Malcolm asked, pointing at the wing. Jordan nodded without turning, fingers still on the joystick. "And a popsicle stick for balance." Malcolm laughed. "I used to build antennae with copper wire and coat hangers." Jordan finally looked up. "You built stuff too?" Malcolm nodded. "Still do. Want to do more of it? Professionally?" Jordan stared at him for a moment. "I'm not even sure I'm allowed to dream like that." "You are now," Malcolm said. "You don't owe me anything. Just promise me one thing when it gets hard, and it will. Keep building." Jordan nodded, and for the first time that day, he smiled. The third recruit came from a community clinic in Koreatown. Her name was Leah. She had once been a trauma nurse, but left the field after burnout, and grief overtook her following the pandemic. She had since taught herself coding through free online courses and had quietly developed a medical software prototype to streamline patient triage. Malcolm met her in the back room of a library where she taught weekend workshops to immigrant women learning basic computer skills. She wore a cardigan over her scrubs and had eyes that looked tired but determined. "Where me?" she asked after Malcolm had explained the fellowship. "Because you've already been saving people. Now I want to make sure someone saves you," he replied gently. "You don't owe me anything. Just promise to finish what you started." Leah blinked hard and then slowly nodded. One by one, Malcolm built the first Lighthouse cohort, not just on paper, but in heart. He didn't look for polish. He looked for fire, for humanity, for people who refused to stop trying. By the time all 5 fellows had signed on, the Lighthouse Initiative was no longer just a concept. It was breathing. The cohort began training together in a shared workspace, each bringing their own voice to the table. Felix shared his mechanical knowledge with Jordan, helping him reinforce the drone's frame using techniques from auto body repair. Leah collaborated with a fellow coder to refine her triage program into a mobile application. Each day, they learned not just from mentors, but from each other. And each evening, after the last light went off in the hallways, Malcolm lingered. He looked over the whiteboards filled with ideas and sketches, sticky notes with timelines, graphs, and circuit diagrams. Sometimes he sat at the edge of the big wooden table and just breathed. One Friday afternoon, Malcolm left early. He took the train out of the city, transferring twice until he reached the small town where his mother had lived and died. The cemetery was quiet, the air still. He walked slowly down the familiar path until he reached her resting place. The headstone was simple, just her name and a line she'd always said. Do what you can with what you have for as long as you're here. He sat on the grass, resting one hand on the earth beside her. "Hey, Ma," he whispered. "I got something to tell you." He paused. The wind stirred a little, brushing through the leaves above. "I didn't fix everything, but I think I'm starting to help." His voice cracked. He took a breath. "There are people like you out there, people who give everything and get forgotten. And there are kids like I was, scared, invisible, thinking the world's never going to notice." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded brochure for the Lighthouse Initiative. "We're finding them, Ma. Not because I'm special, but because someone believed in me before I believed in myself." His eyes watered. "We're helping people now, Ma, just like you taught me." He sat in silence for a long time after that, the wind gently picking up around him. When he finally stood, he left the brochure tucked under the vase by the stone. As he walked away, something inside him settled. The circle wasn't finished, but it had finally closed. The set was buzzing with urgency, production was nearing its peak, and the crew of Keanu's latest science fiction thriller had hit a wall, literally and figuratively. The lighting rigs for the climactic spaceship scene were overloaded. They'd invested in cutting-edge, high-efficiency LEDs to simulate deep space shadows and pulsating solar flares, but the integrated power control system couldn't handle the simultaneous voltage spikes. Cameras glitched, lights flickered unpredictably, everything came to a grinding halt. Producers paced in tight circles. The cinematographer clenched his jaw. Keanu stood near the back of the soundstage, arms folded, absorbing it all. Then he turned his head slowly. Malcolm had been in the corner checking inventory for auxiliary gear. His presence had become a comfort, calm, reliable, quietly competent. Keanu's voice cut through the static. "Malcolm, didn't you once mention a modular load balance system you sketched out?" Malcolm looked up, slightly startled. "For distributed power routing, yeah. It was a prototype I played with a few months ago." "Still got it?" "I think I can get it running," Malcolm replied carefully. "But I'd need about an hour, and the crew would have to rewire the circuits." The head electrician raised an eyebrow. "You're saying you've got a solution no one else here does?" Malcolm didn't puff up or shrink. He just met the man's eyes and said, "I think it's worth trying." Keanu nodded once. "Do it." With that, Malcolm moved fast. He retrieved a slim black case he kept with his personal tools and laid out a set of circuits he had been developing quietly in his off hours. It was a compact bridge board, designed to stabilize loads from multiple sources while filtering interference. A concept most of the crew hadn't even considered. He walked the team through the steps, respectfully but clearly. 2 gaffers followed his lead. A camera tech helped reroute one of the main harnesses. Within 40 minutes, the rig was ready to test. They flipped the main breaker. For the first time that day, the lights held. Perfectly balanced. No flicker, no surge. The solar flare effect ran seamlessly across the backdrop. The lead actress stepped into frame, bathed in the cool shimmer of artificial light that finally worked as intended. The camera rolled, and the director shouted with cautious relief. "That's the shot." Keanu watched it all unfold without fanfare. But inside, he felt a quiet swell of pride. Later that evening, the crew gathered at a small wrap party at a rented rooftop bar overlooking the city. It wasn't extravagant, simple string lights, folding tables, paper plates, but it felt earned. The mood was light. Laughter rose from every corner. Toward the end of the evening, the cinematographer raised his glass to toast the team. "This was a hard one," he said, "but we pulled through." Keanu stepped forward. "I want to add something," he said. Conversations quieted. "This movie almost didn't make it to completion," he began, "not because of a lack of talent, but because of a lack of time. Stress, overload, all of it." He glanced toward Malcolm, who stood near the back, hands in his pockets. But then someone stepped up. Not a lead, not a producer, not someone with a name on the call sheet. Keanu took a breath, his eyes locking onto Malcolm's for a long moment before he continued. This person wasn't even supposed to be in the room when decisions were made. But he was, and he changed everything. Heads turned toward Malcolm. A few crew members exchanged glances, murmuring his name quietly. Others looked surprised, even curious. Malcolm shifted his weight slightly, unsure whether to smile or hide. This film wouldn't have made it across the finish line without him, Keanu said. When our power systems failed, when our equipment gave out, he didn't panic. He didn't wait to be asked twice. He offered a solution he designed on his own time. He solved a problem that a dozen specialists couldn't crack in 2 days. A long silence followed, the kind that wasn't awkward but reverent. Keanu raised his glass. Malcolm Torres, you didn't just help us finish a film. You reminded us what it means to keep going, even when no one's watching. You changed lives by refusing to give up. The rooftop erupted into applause. Malcolm's eyes lowered. Then he slowly raised his hand in a quiet wave, his voice barely louder than a whisper when he said, "Thank you." Keanu stepped down and walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You earned every second of this," he said. By the end of the night, people Malcolm had never spoken to came up just to shake his hand. The costume supervisor asked about his background. The lighting lead joked that Malcolm should be running the department. Even the director pulled him aside and said, "We need more people like you. Not just smart, steady, heart-driven." As the last of the string lights flickered and the rooftop slowly cleared out, Malcolm stood looking over the Los Angeles skyline. Below him, the streets pulsed with movement, with lives, with all the noise and rhythm of a city that never waited for anyone. But tonight, the city felt different. He hadn't just earned applause. He'd found his place. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready to build a world where others could find theirs too. The ballroom of the Lighthouse Initiative's first annual gala shimmered under soft golden light. It wasn't extravagant, but it was beautiful in a grounded, sincere way. Round tables were dressed with navy linens, centerpieces made from reclaimed wood and fresh wildflowers. There were no celebrity red carpets, no press walls, just people. Donors, fellows, mentors, and those who had once stood in the shadows, now finally stepping into the light. Malcolm stood near the stage, adjusting the cuffs of his second-hand but freshly pressed suit. He still wasn't used to events like this. He didn't care for attention. But tonight, it wasn't about him. It was about what the initiative had become. Across the room, Felix, the East LL mechanic, laughed with an engineer from Boston. Leah, the former nurse turned coder, stood proudly beside a demo screen showcasing her new medical app. The foster kid who once built drones from trash was now in line to receive a research grant from a major university. Every table, every seat held a story. Malcolm looked at them and felt something he hadn't in a long time. Pride not for himself, but for what others were becoming. He stepped onto the small wooden stage as the lights dimmed slightly. A modest spotlight lit him from the side. He took a breath. "Good evening," he began. His voice was calm but carried weight. "Some of you know my story. Most of you don't. I used to be a driver. Before that, I was a student. And for a long time, I was just someone trying to get by without being seen." The room grew quiet. Utensils lowered, eyes lifted. I remember once, after a long shift, I was sitting in a diner across from someone who had no reason to care about me. I ordered toast, not because I liked it, but because it was the cheapest thing on the menu. I wrapped half of it in a napkin and slipped it into my coat. A hush settled over the crowd. Malcolm paused, scanning the room. That night, I slept in my car. Again. And I remember thinking, maybe this is just it. Maybe this is where the road ends. He looked down briefly, collecting himself. But I was wrong. The road didn't end. It turned. And I didn't walk it alone. He looked up again, his eyes softer now. "Tonight, I don't want to talk about success. I want to talk about dignity." about what it means to be given a real chance, not just to survive, but to serve, to build, to give back. He gestured to the room gently. The people in this room, they're not here because they were rescued. They're here because someone saw who they already were and said, "You matter." That's what the Lighthouse Initiative stands for. He took a final breath, letting the words settle. Tonight, there are people putting food on their tables because someone believed in them. And maybe one day, someone else will say the same because of you. He stepped back from the mic, the room still quiet for a beat, before a long, swelling applause filled the space. Malcolm stepped down from the stage with a small nod, not basking in the applause, but humbly accepting it. As he returned to his seat, people reached out to shake his hand, to offer soft congratulations, or simply to look him in the eye and say thank you. But his gaze drifted past them all, toward the very back of the room. Near the exit, half shadowed by the drapes and quietly standing alone, was Keanu. He hadn't spoken, hadn't taken the stage, hadn't even allowed his name to appear on the event banner. But there he was, wearing a simple black suit with no tie, hands clasped gently in front of him, watching. Their eyes met. Malcolm gave him the smallest nod. A silent thank you layered with a deeper meaning. Gratitude, yes, but also something stronger. Recognition. A bond forged through respect, not favors. And Keanu, always unassuming, returned the nod with the faintest smile. His eyes shimmered in the low light, glassy but calm. He had stayed out of the spotlight all night, blending in with the caterers and volunteers. But he'd heard every word. A few people turned to look, quietly realizing who he was. No one rushed him, no one crowded him. It was as if everyone instinctively understood that tonight wasn't about a famous actor. It was about what he'd helped create, and more importantly, who he had quietly lifted. Keanu stayed only a few more minutes, long enough to see the dance floor open, long enough to witness Malcolm laughing with one of the new fellows and their daughter. Then he turned to leave. On his way out, he paused at the photo wall, the one covered in black and white portraits of Lighthouse Initiative fellows and their short handwritten bios. He found Malcolm's. Beneath the picture, it simply read, "Driver, son, engineer, believer in second chances." Keanu lingered for a moment, then gently reached into his coat pocket and slid something behind the photo. It was a folded note. Later that night, long after the gala had ended and the tables had been cleared, Malcolm passed by his own portrait and noticed the slip of paper tucked just behind the frame. He unfolded it slowly. In simple handwriting it said, "You were never lost, just waiting for the right light." K. Malcolm stood there in silence, and for the second time that day, his eyes filled with tears. Not because he felt indebted, but because he finally understood something he'd never let himself believe before. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was seen. The morning sun crept over the Los Angeles skyline, spilling gold across the rooftops and casting long shadows over the sidewalks. It was early, the kind of quiet that only exists before the city remembers it's supposed to be busy. Malcolm Torres stepped out of his small apartment, coffee in one hand, backpack slung over his shoulder. He locked the door behind him and paused for a moment on the front step, breathing in the crisp air that still carried a hint of ocean salt. It had been a long time since he'd started a day without the tight knot of worry in his chest. No more wondering where he'd sleep. No more calculating how far he could stretch a few dollars. No more hiding. He walked calmly, past rows of modest storefronts and early morning joggers. His steps were unhurried, his face calm. He passed the cafe where he'd once only ordered toast. He passed the lot where his car used to sit, windows fogged, his breath visible on cold nights. Now his gaze didn't lower in shame. He looked forward, straight ahead. As he turned the corner near the freeway underpass, he caught sight of a vehicle he recognized all too well. A battered sedan, parked half on the curb, the back seat filled with blankets and grocery bags. And in the front, a figure curled under a hoodie, barely visible. He didn't stop immediately. He walked past, heart tightening. Then he turned back. Slowly, quietly. He didn't knock on the window. He didn't take a photo. He didn't try to startle or speak. That wasn't what this moment called for. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a notepad and pen. On a torn sheet of paper, he wrote 5 simple lines, each one carefully thought out. Each one the kind of sentence he wished someone had once left for him. Then, gently, he folded the paper and slid it under the windshield wiper. The car's occupant didn't stir, and Malcolm didn't wait for them to. He turned again and walked on, leaving behind only the small note fluttering lightly in the morning breeze. It read, "If you're reading this, don't give up. You are not invisible. You are not worthless. You are more than your hardest day. The world is still waiting for your gift." He reached the studio lot just as the crew began setting up for the day. The security guard nodded at him with a smile, the kind that said, "You belong here." Malcolm nodded back, because for the first time in years, he didn't question it. Later that day, as the sun dipped low behind the studio buildings, Malcolm stood near the edge of the set, sipping from his thermos. The sound of quiet conversations and soft laughter carried across the lot, but he was focused on something else. A final lighting test on the rig he'd helped design. It worked flawlessly. Clean energy, minimal draw, no overheating. But it wasn't just the system he cared about anymore. It was the people using it. The sound guy who now brought his teenage son to visit. The young lighting assistant who reminded him of the foster kid he'd recently recruited. Even the grip who'd once joked about the quiet tech guy and now called him a genius. Malcolm was building more than equipment now. He was building faith, confidence, a map out of the dark. As the crew wrapped for the evening, Malcolm found himself lingering again. The lot emptied slowly. He walked toward the corner trailer, the one he used as an office now, passing a chalkboard wall where someone had scrawled words from a recent crew meeting. He paused when he saw the quote, one that someone must have overheard during his speech at the gala. "You didn't just help me sleep, you helped me dream again." He stared at it for a moment, then reached for a piece of chalk and added a second line beneath it. "Sometimes, the greatest engineering we can do is rebuilding a life." The next morning, that quote would be shared across social media, etched in sharp white letters beneath a photo of Malcolm standing beside the lighting rig. The story of the Lighthouse Initiative would ripple across the internet again, with people asking where to donate, how to volunteer, and who else needed a second chance. But Malcolm didn't stay to see that happen. That evening, he packed up his things, left the chalkboard behind, and stepped back into the night. He had another coffee stop to make, another quiet corner to pass, and maybe, just maybe, another windshield to leave a note on. Because he remembered what it felt like to be forgotten, to be underestimated, to be one meal away from losing hope. And now that he wasn't, he knew exactly what to do with the light he'd found. He'd pass it on and let it shine. Have you ever met someone whose hidden strength changed your life? Tell us in the comments, what kind of second chance story should Keanu help with next?